Welcome to Legally Uncensored, where we have the real conversations about love, law, and liberation. I'm your host, Demetria Graves, and this season we're reframing relationships through a new lens. In this episode, we're diving deep into spirituality in marriage, how faith, sex, and the body collide when life doesn't go as planned. What happens when your beliefs keep you bound, or when your body remembers what your spirit tries to forget? Let's get into the truth, the healing, and the liberation that comes when faith meets flesh. Today, we have a very special guest, Lyvonne Briggs, Emmy Award-winning leader in spirituality and empowerment. Lyvonne Briggs is an Emmy Award-winning producer, author, and Lyvonne Briggs is an Emmy Award-winning producer, author, and transformational speaker, blending spirituality, healing, and empowerment. Lyvonne, welcome to Legally Uncensored.
Thank you, Demetria. I'm so happy to
Welcome.
be here.
Tell us more about yourself.
So my name is Lyvonne Briggs. I'm a Queens girl and a joy finder, an Emmy Award winner, daughter of the church and the diaspora. And I'm also an author and a podcaster. I talk about living your spirituality from a place of pleasure rather than shame and holistic wellness for women's liberation.
Tell us the name of your podcast, because I love it.
Yes. So many of you who are joining me and know me know that Sensual Faith was my baby for a very long time. My debut book is called Sensual Faith, The Art of Coming Home to Your Body. And after about a year of some reevaluation and pivoting, we are now known as Daughters of the Diaspora. So I recently got my Bayesian citizenship. My mom was born in Barbados, and I also grew up in New York City. And so daughter is Jamaican patois for daughter, girl, and also daughter, you know what I'm saying? From the subway in New York City, the MTA.
So fitting for a New Yorker. I love it.
Daughters of the Diaspora, we're healing diasporic baddies and those who uplift us with lavish soul care.
I love it. So thank you again for being here. So, Lyvonne, can you tell us a little bit about your life as a pastor?
So I did not want to be a pastor. I wanted to preach. I wanted to bring the word, shut down the church, let y'all have the necessary conversations and leave. But ultimately, my path was such that I've always had a pastoral heart. So I was born to Caribbean immigrants. I was a baby acolyte or an altar girl in the Episcopal Church. By college, I was a minister in the Pentecostal Church. And I had all these questions about the Bible, which led me to study at Yale Divinity School. So I graduated with my Master of Divinity, discovered the wonderful world of womanism, which for the uninitiated is a framework that centers the perspectives, experiences, and vantage points of Black women. And I was in the church with all of this knowledge and all of this vigor and zeal. But much like you know, Demetria, there's one thing to study theory in an institution, and then it's another thing entirely to have praxis in people's lives. And so I identified as a body and sex positive womanist pastor because, unlike many Christian pastors, I started from a place of the body is good and that sexuality is holy and a sacred gift.
Well, thank you for that, because this comes up a lot in my practice, especially actually with Black women, because Black women would come to me and say, I didn't get a prenup because when I prayed about it, that was not on my heart. Or I married this person because when I prayed about a partner, God said or God told me. And subsequently, that person is just taking them to the bank, basically. And I notice a lot of, I won't even get into the pastors and what they're doing and that lifestyle. And let me just put this disclaimer out. We're not talking about all churches. We're just talking about an experience that can occur. I'm not saying all churches are bad or good or whatever. Just speaking through what I have experienced in trying to educate women, especially Black women, about the experience. So with that said, there are a lot of Black women that feel like they need to marry a deacon or a pastor, or what happens if they don't? And so where do you think some of that comes from? as a pastor, why do some women feel, for lack of a better term, that they have to settle or they have to marry the deacon or God told them to get a prenup? Kind of where does that stem from?
It stems from scamming. Okay. I will say there are a lot of scams in the church, right?
Yeah,
Purity
yes.
culture is a scam. The idea that
Mm,
women, specifically young girls, need to keep their bodies pure and holy. Meanwhile, boys and teenage boys and men run rampant in and beyond the church, right?
right.
So we have to start there. When you're talking to Black women, I know that likely you are in the Black church, right? Which
Mm-hmm.
means a colonized version of Christianity. Most Black churches are at least 85% Black women in membership.
Mm,
Black church leadership is not 85% Black women. So when you have Black men who are steeped in the illusion of white supremacy, toxic patriarchy, misogyny, sexism, internalized oppression and racism, queer phobia, homophobia, transphobia, age phobia, right?
right,
Fat
right.
phobia. When you're
Mm-hmm.
hearing people who are your spiritual leaders sharing messages about your body being evil, sinful, deviant, right? Something that needs to be dominated, beaten into submission. That doesn't just do something for your spiritual journey, that does something to your psyche. You can't
Mm-hmm.
live in the church Sunday after Sunday, year after year, decade after decade. Here, if you have sex before marriage, you're going to hell. Good girls don't give head. Keep your legs closed and think that just because you're engaged or married, that the switch is going to turn on and you're going to become this sexual goddess. That's not the way that it works. And so it's poor teaching in the church. It's insufficient teaching in the church because ultimately the church is an institution and institutions are made of people. And when you look at the people who run these institutions, you have to ask yourself, what do they need to remain in control? What do they need to remain in power? And often it's domination over your body. And if I can control what you think about sex and sexuality, I can control your body. And if I can control your body, I can control your mind.
Right. Because I often have women make or earn very nice salaries, 40, 50,000 a month, and then they'll marry someone from the church or otherwise that make 9, 10,000 a month. And then they're crying to me and mad because they have to pay spousal support. So they are getting these teachings from church. Don't get a prenup, don't do this, but legally the law doesn't follow those teachings.
Right. The
And
law don't
so
care about your church membership.
no.
And if your church is teaching you that the man is the head of the household and he's the leader and you have to
Yes.
submit, well, what are we talking about when we're talking about these words? We're talking about language, right? Submission
Yes.
is a mutual exchange. And I'm only submitting to someone to who can submit to me. But when you're taught that being submissive means that you are obedient and you are docile and you're essentially a second class citizen in your own home, well, then you think, well, I'm supposed to serve because he's my husband and he's the head. When you met this man, he didn't have a bed frame, sis. He didn't have no books, let alone a bookshelf, right?
Mhm.
Who is the head here? Who is the leader here, right? And so when we are scammed by toxic ideology masquerading as theology and doctrine, well, that's how you end up in these places and spaces. The last thing that I'll say is that women are often taught not to trust their intuition. Even in
Mhm.
my own experience and in the experiences of many other women, we can all pinpoint a moment where we felt that thing in our gut, that in our chest, that right on the back of our neck. And we didn't listen to it because we were taught not to trust ourselves. But those instinctive knowings, that too is God. And those are the things we need to listen to as well.
So how do you reconcile that as a woman of God, right? That I prayed and God said this. I hear that a lot. God said that. God spoke to my heart. God, God, God. So how do you reconcile that with the reality of the situation, right? If you're saying God said don't get a prenup or God said select this partner, how do you reconcile that as a woman of God so you can keep your religion, right? But still be informed and make more informed choices about your life, basically.
Lovely question, Demetria. And so it's not my place to tell someone whether or not they heard from God, right? But it is my place to posit, to query, from whose perspective are you hearing God? Because a lot of times people will equate their pastor or the preacher with the voice of God, and you can hear God directly for yourself without the interference of the pastor's indoctrination. And so when we're talking to Black women and them hearing from God, we have to remember that a lot of times Black women are steeped in teachings that purport the deification of suffering. We make suffering holy, suffering pious. Jesus suffered, so I have to suffer. Jesus was crucified, so I have to be crucified. When the fact of the matter is, Jesus already did the work. Jesus was already crucified, and guess what? Jesus rose. So why are you, sister, forcing yourself to be suffering? Your dating life, your courtship, your engagement, your wedding day, the marriage that follows, there should be pleasure. There should be joy. Your marriage should not be an ongoing crash course in how much pain and suffering can I endure. That's something that you have to pull out at the root. God is never calling you to suffer.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I have a colleague, Minister Hazel Cherry, who says pleasure is a fruit of the spirit too. And
Mm-hmm.
because Black women Christians are often so disconnected from pleasure, from the idea of desire, and demonize it rather than make it a ritual and make it a part of their sacred spiritual practice, a lot of times what they're hearing is God is actually insufficient teaching.
That is deep. But how do you encourage, to your point, a lot of Black women are really, really into their church and heavy into the teachings. So how do you reconcile that very deep-rooted old way of thinking with where you have transformed today?
So there are a few things that Black women need to do. The first is we need to decolonize our Christianity, right? Which means we need to remove it from the subjugation of racism and sexism. If you always are hearing Blackness is equated with sin, if you're hearing that people who are Black are descended from some cursed lineage, right? That takes a toll on you. It's why so many Black people end up going to HBCUs, historically Black colleges and universities, because they're like, I want to be in a place where we uplift Blackness, like, hello, on a daily basis. The second thing you need to do is reclaim your African spiritual base and practices. I don't know how many listeners know this, but Jesus was from North Africa. Jesus was African. If you grew up with the white Jesus like I did, that can mess with your psyche. If you are grown and married and still believe Jesus was white, well, babes, I didn't hold your hand when I said it, right? Jesus was a Negro. And so what does that mean? That means that Jesus had African spiritual practices. And you as a Black woman, you are a daughter of the diaspora, which means you too have a right to those practices.
Mm-hmm.
The third thing that you need to do is heal your bodily trauma. A lot of Black women suffer harm as it relates to the body. And that's why we end up in church, because we're looking for some sort of hope, some sort of reclamation that this experience, this PTSD, this anxiety, this trauma that I, am carrying in my body, it won't last always. But there are actual, methodologies and modalities outside of the church that can help you to process and heal that trauma. And then the last thing is to learn how to love yourself unapologetically. And the last thing is to learn how to love yourself unapologetically. The Black church does not teach you how to love yourself. The Black church teaches you how to debase yourself, how to humiliate yourself, and they call it humbling yourself, being humility. But if you look at that word humble, it means to make oneself small, to shrink oneself. How could this great, big, bodacious, audacious, creative, expansive God command you, God's creation, to shrink yourself? My friend Zan West, she poses this question. She says, who does it serve for you to believe it that way?
Mm.
Who does it serve for you to believe it that way? So that's just something to think about, from the church house to the courthouse.
I mean, I'm already feeling inspired already.
I love that.
So, one thing I want to talk about is sex, right? So, we always, to your point, you're told you shouldn't have sex before marriage, sex is bad, oral sex is bad. So, what happens when you get married and now it's supposed to be a great thing? How do women make that transition and learn? Because a lot of times women are waiting and, well, they're waiting. I don't know how long, but women wait. How do you learn your body and not just be the pleasure of someone else? So, what do we do?
That's so good. So, as someone who absolutely experienced the born again virginity era and the Jesus is my boyfriend era,
Mm-hmm.
I know all too well the effects of the church's poor teachings on sex and sexuality and how that affected my self-esteem and my confidence and even how I moved through the world, how I thought about dating, how I thought about marriage, right? I thought I was going to be in a worship service one day and I was going to be speaking in tongues and he was going to be speaking in tongues and we was just going to look up and look at each other and God would be like, that's your spouse, like that's the kind of story we make up.
Right.
But once I realized that just because I'm in the church heavy now and I'm called to minister doesn't mean I don't have the desire to masturbate anymore. I was in college masturbating.
Mm-hmm.
It was innate to me, right? And so what I think Black women Christians need to prioritize is that there are no first person narratives of women. Well, that's not entirely true, but mostly women or children in the Bible, right? And so, because the Bible is such an esteemed text in the Christian tradition, a lot of teaching and ethics and how we live our lives stems from the Bible. But there's sex in the Bible, and there's good sex in the Bible. And we have to be really honest about that because I know a lot of Christian women, they deify and romanticize Ruth and Boaz. That story of Ruth, who was with her sister-in-law, her mother-in-law, and they ain't had no money because back then, if you weren't attached to a man, you were destitute. And the mama comes and says, look, this man I heard about, Boaz. Okay, this nigga got money. So, and we need some money. So, Ruth, I need you to go and put yourself in front of Boaz so he see you because you fine. And I'm too old to have sons. Y'all can't marry my sons. So we talk about, oh, Ruth was committed to Naomi. And Ruth, she was gleaning in the fields. She was on the threshing floor. And Boaz saw how hard she worked. And look, she got her man. Y'all, Boaz was 80 fucking years old. I know. I'm cussing because I'm excited. Some of you are going to get more caught up in the cussing than you are in the story. But I need you to know, one, Boaz was 80 years old. And then in Ruth 4, when Ruth goes into Boaz's room and she uncovers his feet, baby, what man do you know marries a woman just because she touched his feet? That Hebrew word, regel, might mean foot, but unless Boaz only had one foot and loved having his foot tickled like an OnlyFans man, we're talking about a penis. So in the story of Ruth and Boaz in the Bible, in the canon, Naomi tells Ruth to perform oral sex on Boaz. That is something that is taught in seminary. It's something that pastors learn, especially if they take a Hebrew language course. And it's not something that they teach because they know what that means for the liberation of women and women's sexuality. So the Bible has been used to restrict your sexuality. And then theology, God talk. So I know that's a lot. And, Ruth and Boaz is streaming on whatever platform and people are loving it. And I just want you to know that's inaccurate. It's a lie.
That brings me into, you talk a lot about coming home to your body. So what does that look like? And how does one even start that journey if they have no clue about their body and what that even means?
So this is what I talk about in my debut book, Sensual Faith, The Art of Coming Home to Your Body. I invite women, particularly Black women, to live their spirituality from a place of pleasure rather than shame. Because for far too long, family, church, and society has been teaching us that our body is evil and something that we need to constrict and restrict. But when you look at the woman's body, come on, somebody, we are the only creatures in all of creation to be bearers of the clitoris. The clitoris has one job. The clitoris does not bear babies. You can't urinate through it. You can't defecate through it. You can't sweat through it. And if you can, well, maybe there's a superpower that you got. But the point is that the clitoris is for pleasure. And God made our bodies. And if God is good, we as God's creation are good. That means my clitoris is good. Your clitoris is good. And I know God created pleasure because God created the clitoris. That aha moment for me made me realize that I am supposed to be experiencing pleasure when I want it. Pleasure is my birthright. And once I really started to sit with that, then it unfolded into other parts of my life. Can pleasure be sexual? Absolutely. But it can go beyond sexuality too. For instance, I met a woman who was married for 20 years and had 2 kids and had never experienced an orgasm.
Wow.
We met at a conference and she just came up to me. She grabbed my arm and she was like, "Oh my God, I have to tell you, I love your book." And she told me her story. The fact that a woman can be married to a man and birth 2 of his children and never experience an orgasm is a fault of family, church, and society. Family for making you think that you got to be a good girl, whatever that means, represent this family well. Hip hop womanist scholar Ebony Janice Moore talks a lot about that family respectability stuff. 2, the church done told you that sex is bad, and so you think sex is just for procreation the whole time. You were owed orgasms. Okay. And then 3, society shaming women who embrace and express their sexuality on their own terms. And so it's not your fault, sis, right? But it is your responsibility. And I know there are some of you listening who were like, "Oh my gosh, this is demonic." And she ain't okay, cool. And I know there are some of you listening that are like, "Oh my God, this is exactly what I've been thinking. Thank you for putting my thoughts into words, Lyvonne. Let me buy your book." And then there are some of you who are like, "This feels right, but it doesn't sound right." Or like, "I know this to be true. I just don't know how to do it." I'm talking to those 2 groups. What you're feeling is your inner knowing, is your intuition, is your spirit. The Holy Spirit is a divine feminine entity. In Greek, that word Sophia, it has an A ending. You know, when we study foreign languages, if it ends in A, it's feminine. The Holy Spirit is feminine, but we've been calling it he and it for so long that you don't even think that a woman can be divine. There are people who might think, "How can she be a pastor? She has a uterus and a vagina." Like, yeah, God made me black woman, pastor, preacher, all of that. Fine, right? So it is what it is. But that's how we shift forward to know that sexuality is a sacred gift, that pleasure is your birthright, and that you are owed pleasure just by being born.
I just love that. I'm even listening to you, and I find myself to be quite liberated, thinking, wow, we don't talk about this enough. I think you are the first guest that came and talked about sex, right?
Demetria, we talk about that all the time. I mean, shout out to you. You've had your firm for 20 years. So you have seen the landscape and you have met women from C-suite on down to students, right?
Right.
And it doesn't matter if I'm in front of black women, white women, Asian women, Latinas, blue women, purple women, green women. They can talk about strategy. They can talk about the old boys club. They can talk about fashion and lentil recipes. But no matter how high power she is, the moment sex and sexuality comes up, mute.
Yep, like he.
Turn around, everybody on mute, right? It's the Beyonce challenge up in there. We talking about high-powered, high-level women. And so it's not us. It ain't us.
Right.
It's the system.
So how do we transform the teaching, right? I would want my daughter to know this. I mean, not to go and practice everywhere, but I think, how do we start teaching not only our daughters, our sons about this, not just about their happiness, our sexual happiness, but women as well? Why aren't we teaching this, and how do we start kind of reframing the conversation?
This is a really great question, Demetria. And I think about it in terms of the church and beyond the church, because I taught 8th grade English for a year and we were talking about race and racism and sex and all kinds of stuff, right? These are really heavy topics for a 13-year-old, but there has to be a way, and there is a way to have age appropriate conversations with 13-year-olds about race and racism, right? Just like there are appropriate ways to talk to 13-year-olds about sex and religion and God. And so it comes with talking to different demographics, different age groups, in language that they can understand about topics that they need to know about so that they can be empowered, right? It makes sense to talk to our kindergartners about good touch and bad touch, right? That's not a conversation about sexual intercourse, but it is a conversation about the body. And so if we can start to empower folks like me who are big and bad and bold enough to go where God is going and to have these conversations in age appropriate ways, then we can start to change the landscape. And like I said before, the Black church is 85% Black women. Black church leadership isn't 85% Black women.
Yes.
We need to start ordaining more women. We need to start ordaining more queer people. We need to start ordaining more trans people, because the more of these stories are told, the more our stories are going to be reflected in the pulpit. A man is not going to preach to you about menopause. He might complain about his menopausal wife and her sweat fits or her libido, right? But don't nobody know your story like another woman.
Right.
So we have to change the perception of women as less than, as second-class citizens. If you still are tithing to a church that doesn't ordain women, I need you to find a new church. You can tithe to me, you can tithe to Demetria, you can tithe to some. But if they're not going to ordain women, people who are you, right? That's telling you that they don't think that you can be close enough to God, when in fact you are an expression of God on the earth. So I will say the teaching and the letting the leaders do the work. In terms of a personal, more practical in the moment tip, is to start romanticizing pleasure in your life. Many people think that sensuality and sexuality are the same thing, but they're not. Sensuality, I define it as the ultimate practice in mindfulness. It's being present with your body. It's taking a deep breath. It's saying, am I hungry? Am I thirsty? Do I need a nap? Did I take my meds? Do I need to FaceTime Bae? Do I need to masturbate, right? Checking in with your body to be like, where am I? Because if you can't check in with your body about basic necessities, sensual things, sexuality is not going to be the greatest gift that you can have and open, and you deserve that. So think about, how can I embrace pleasure in my everyday life? How can I, instead of taking a shower, rushing out the door, barely dry, give myself an extra 5 minutes and moisturize my body with some coconut oil, right? As I'm massaging my body, just think messages of self-love. Kiss my arm, put kisses to my belly, my stretch marks, any parts of myself that might be a little harder to love. How can I, instead of burning the roof of my mouth on this cup of coffee or tea, how can I hold this mug or this cup? How can I smell the aromas of the liquid? How can I sense the warmth like going down my throat and feel like an internal hug? These are moments that cause us to slow down. And when you slow down, you have no choice but to be present. And that is where the true blessings lie, is in presence.
I love this so much, but I want you to do something for me, because people don't believe me because I'm the help, the divorced person. But empower that woman that hasn't had a orgasm ever, that is coming out of a marriage, that doesn't love herself, that's starting to date and all of that. Still very faith-based, but they're having issues with getting back out there, with loving themselves, with all of the things we talked about today. What do you say to her?
Let's see. To your point, Demetria, to the woman who's coming out of a divorce, take a deep cleansing breath, sis. Big inhale in, big exhale out. I want you to know that God does not hate your divorce. God does not hate you because you're divorced. That is a lie that men who needed women to remain in unsafe spaces, right, for their power, sold to you so that you would not rebel. But God wants your thriving, right? Divorce is not a sin, especially when you are not being heard, or even worse, being harmed. Sin is not a legalistic list of do's and don'ts. Sin is merely separation from God. And so if being married to that person made you feel far from God, that connection was sinful. It wasn't you that was sinful. And so God loves you. There's nothing you can do to make yourself unlovable to God. The second thing is that you may not know what it is that you like. I remember meeting a woman, she had 3 sons, and when the baby went off to college, the next morning she woke up to make eggs, and she didn't know how to make her eggs because she always made them the way her sons liked them.
Mm.
So I need you to learn how you like your eggs. I need you to learn what lights you up, what turns you on, what do you want to order off the menu, not because you're restricting calories and you think that's what you're supposed to eat, but what when you read it, that sounds good. I think I'll have a bit of that, right? A great book to read is Women Who Run with the Wolves by Clarissa Pinkola Estes. Fabulous book that really helps women to think about pleasure and desire in ways that serve you. Because so many of us are taught in the church that we are meant to serve God and others and never ourselves. But on this side of the divorce, on this side of signing them papers, you get to center yourself. Centering yourself is not sinful. You cannot pour from an empty cup. Center yourself without being a total, Nimrod and being mean and arrogant. But then and only then will you be able to pour into others.
That is beautiful. And I also want you to do me one more favor and talk to the woman that is not out yet, that is still bound by sacrifice and silence. And on top of that, unhappiness. What do we say to her while she's still figuring out her next move and what she wants to do?
I see you. I hear you. I acknowledge you and I believe you. And what happens to you, especially in these harmful spaces, in these unhappy times, it's not your fault, right? You're not being punished for some sin that you committed when you were a child or a teenager or a young adult or yesterday or last week, right? This is simply you being connected to someone that maybe if y'all had met at a different time, you never would have been connected. But there is so much beauty and grace and self-forgiveness. Perhaps your intuition told you not to even go on a date with that man, much less marry him, and you did anyway. Guess what? Don't beat yourself up for not listening to your intuition. Praise yourself for hearing right and obey next time, right? You knew better than to date that woman because things with her separated spouse were messy, right? She was separated when y'all met, and you like, oh, it's okay because they gonna be separated soon, and then y'all end up married and it's more of the same. It's okay. You made the decision. Guess what? You can make a new one. And so I don't think we should look at divorce as a prophylactic, so to speak, right? Oh, if we get married and it don't work out, we'll just get a divorce. But if you have really loved to the extent that you could, if you have shown up, if you have accessed resources and you feel like it's one-sided, you feel like there are more bad days than good days, it's time to recalibrate. And there's so much beauty, joy, pleasure on the other side. But the only way through it is through it. And the only way through it is to start it.
That is so beautiful. And this was such an amazing conversation. I think we need to talk about sex more here to make it a safe space. And
I would love to come back. Let's talk about the sex, child. Talk about vibrators and positions and oral and kink. And
I am here for it.
also keep in mind that you are doing something that many women in your lineage were not able to do. There were women who wanted to divorce, who wanted to leave, who wanted to strike out on their own, and they simply couldn't. And so your ancestors are actually with you and supporting you, whether you're on the still need to get outside, going through it side, or on the other side. So know that God, the divine, the creator, your ancestors, and your community and resources like this podcast and, other folks are doing are all here with you, holding you, supporting you, loving you, cheering for you, and rooting you on. And you got this.
That is awesome. That's a great affirmation people can just listen to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you for allowing me that space.
Of course. So, Lyvonne, thank you so much for taking the time to spend on Legally Uncensored. How can people find you?
So you can find me on all the things, my website and socials, lyvonnebriggs.com, at Lyvonne Briggs, LYVONNEBRIGGS. And I can't wait to be in conversation and community with y'all.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.